Welcome everyone to the INHSU and Crackdown satellite session, which will be a Crackdown podcast listening party with a theme of the war against feeling all right. We have tons of great speakers today that will all share bits of their stories along with clips from different different pieces of the Crackdown podcast. My name is Matthew Bond. I'm the program coordinator with the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs, and I use the pronouns he, him. I'm joining today from the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. This is what we call land acknowledgement in Canada. Land acknowledgements are an honest and historically accurate way to recognize the traditional First Nation, Métis, or Inuit territories of a place. They can be presented verbally or visually. Think signage, short theater presentations, or just simple spoken word greetings. According to the first curator of Indigenous art at the Art Gallery of Ontario, land acknowledgements have one goal, regardless of format. They commemorate Indigenous people, principal kinship to the land, and the fact that we have not and cannot be erased from her, our collective mothers. A quote from the person is, "They're a starting place to change in how the land is seen and talked about." She says they help redefine how people place themselves in relation to First People. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Sione to do a land acknowledgement in Australia.
Thanks, Matt. I'd like to chime in and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands of Australia that I'm coming to you from. In particular, they've been custodians of this beautiful land and owners for tens of thousands of years, and the sovereignty here has never been ceded to colonists or anyone that lives here now. In particular, I'm coming to you from the beautiful lands of the Wurundjeri people. I'd like to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. My name's Garth Mullins. Good morning, good evening, good night, good midday, whatever fucking time zone you're in. I hope you're doing all right. Yeah, I'm the host of this lovely panel that we're about to have. And as well, I'm the executive producer and host of the Crackdown podcast, which is made by people who use drugs about the drug war. Today, we're going to have a bunch of different speakers. I'm going to play a little bit about what we're talking about the war on euphoria. I'm going to play clips off the podcast and just explain what's going on. First, a bit about me. I'm basically just an old school dope fiend. Used opioids for most of my adult life, heroin for a good lot of it, and then methadone and everything else that's prescribed or not prescribed, fentanyl, hydromorphone, Dilaudid, whatever you have. And that has really been a defining part of my life. Never really talked about it until the last few years. I was very ashamed of it. And I also believed that it was a terrible thing that I was doing and that I had to kind of hide it and erase it and flee from it. But as I thought about it a bit more, and as I got active with people here in Vancouver, in the Vancouver area network of drug users, I'm in British Columbia, Canada right now, I started to realize that drugs played an important role for me, as they do for a lot of people, a really rational role. I was a pretty suicidal kid, and I used heroin as a way to keep myself alive. And that's how it worked. And once I started to realize this, I was a little more forgiving of myself. And I think people who use drugs for a lot of reasons like that, to treat trauma, maybe because terrible things happened to them when they were kids, maybe because they've experienced the trauma of colonization or racism, or because they have to work a shitty, boring job, or because they get injured at work, or also because drugs are fun. That's why a lot of people use drugs. And it shouldn't be a criminal sentence, and it shouldn't be a death sentence. And so today we wanted to look a little bit into, why is that such a controversial idea? Why is feeling all right? Why is a little bit of euphoria so frowned on? And I think I kind of entered into this discussion a little bit through a friend of mine named Raya Jean. Raya has been on Suboxone for the last several years, but it was a real struggle. I want to play you a clip from our recent episode called Cop Baked In, where Raya explains a little bit, or Raya and I explain a little bit about what Suboxone is. So can we roll the first clip, please, Heidi? Thanks.
She explained to me that, okay, well, like, I don't think we can help you unless you're going to go on the medication, the Suboxone, because that's what we do here. So I don't know what we would be doing with you if we didn't give you that.
Suboxone is the brand name for a medication prescribed to treat opioid use disorder. It was first developed in the 1960s as a painkiller, meant to compete with codeine. But when scientists tested the drug on morphine-dependent monkeys, they discovered it had a unique effect. And that meant it might be more profitable as an addiction treatment medication instead.
The primary active ingredient in Suboxone is buprenorphine. This acts as a blocker to other opioids. Buprenorphine.
And so she patiently, very patiently and sweetly, syruply, indulged all of my questions. Even drew some little diagrams for me, and then said, "Okay."
What little diagrams?
Well, she drew what happens to the receptors. So the receptors are open and they all get closed by the Suboxone, by the buprenorphine.
So you're gesturing to me like a nice little helpful person closing a rabbit hutch is what it looked like.
Yeah,
you were.
yeah. Yeah. And it just closes them and it seals them as long as you take it every day. And that's what happens. Bingo, bango. And you can't use because the buprenorphine is covering these little rabbit holes. Isn't that cool?
Ask your doctor for more information about Suboxone because opioid addiction is not something you should have to go through alone.
The nurse explains to Raya that once your opioid receptors are covered by Suboxone, you can't really build a high. If you try to take more Suboxone, the feeling won't really increase. If you try to take some other kind of opioid, like heroin or methadone, same deal. You can't build it up. You can't get high. If you try to get creative and shoot Suboxone, then you're in for a world of hurt because Suboxone has naloxone in it, and that shit is going to drain your system of opioids all at once. That's called a precipitated withdrawal, and it's vicious. All of this made Suboxone a lot different from methadone. Many methadone users like me, well, we chip. We don't always stick strictly to just the methadone. And that means we top up our prescribed dose with illegal opioids. It's a lot harder, though not impossible, to do that on Suboxone. Raya says that this was all advertised to her as one of the main benefits of this stuff, that she'd have less craving and withdrawal symptoms, and less euphoria too.
That's what they said. Some people will say that at the beginning they have this euphoria feeling, but I think it's more just the absence of sickness. But whatever it is, it will go away. Don't worry. Okay, I'm not worrying. It's like as if my biggest fear is that my medicine would actually make me feel good for an extended period of time.
So, as Raya explains, Suboxone plays this role. In fact, one of its selling points is that you're not supposed to be able to get high. And this goes to this theory that us feeling good, drug users feeling that sense of euphoria, it's everything. So, this in my life I haven't been on Suboxone, but I have felt the rules around the methadone program that you are not supposed to use anything else. You're not supposed to get high. In fact, they test my urine every time I go into the clinic to make sure that I'm not using something else. Although I have not stuck to that rule very well over my life on methadone. And I struggled a lot with it and I felt bad. And I started to realize, wait, the methadone does take away the dope sickness for me when it's working properly, when you're dosed properly, when it's the right kind of formulation. And so that was a great relief for me to not have the dope sickness. But why was I struggling so much? Why was I still using? And it's because that high, that euphoria was such a relief for me. Some of the bad shit that happened to me as a kid, it was like, I describe it like those feelings are like terrible ghosts that are all around you. And you've managed with the use of heroin to shut them in a little box. But then when that euphoria, when that heroin's gone, it's like the last scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, with Indiana Jones, where the Nazis capture the Ark of the Covenant and they take the lid off and all the ghosts fly out and they melt everybody's faces. That's what it felt like to me. And so, of course, I was always trying to use to kind of put the lid back on and tame the ghosts and just feel normal, and that to me, that relief was euphoria. And the more that the rules of methadone or the formulation of Suboxone or Sublocade or whatever you have, the more the rules of housing that you have to be sober, the more the rules of probation programs that you can't use, the more these rules try to get all around us to not use, the more I found myself struggling like this. And Raya struggles too. But for Raya, the struggle happened right on her opioid receptors. I'm going to let her explain. Here's clip 2, if you could roll that, Heidi. It started with one small slip. Then Raya's back on the Suboxone. Then there's another slip and another. Each time, Raya feels a palpable sense of guilt and redoubles her conviction that this time she'll make Suboxone work. But her tolerance for opioids was going up, and the Suboxone didn't just hold her the same way. Eventually, Raya's taking Suboxone every morning and topping up with down every night. Sometimes this feels great. Other times, it causes a storm of sickness and anxiety. We started to call this the cop baked in effect.
The drug is sort of fighting the fentanyl for your receptors, right? The cop is fighting the evil drug for your receptors. And I can feel that fight. My body starts to feel that fight.
What does it feel like?
It feels like the most horrible anxiety attack that you can imagine. Like, it's like my body starts to sweat. It's like my face is completely wet. I get that prickly kind of tingly feeling all over my body. It's almost like it's like early withdrawal kind of, but it comes on so suddenly. And it's just this feeling of like dread and doom. And your body feels like it's in resistance to something, but like you really just want to relax. I really just want to relax, and I can't. And even if I try to take more, smoke more fentanyl off a foil, for example, that doesn't seem to make it go away.
So you have to wait for the cop to go off duty.
Yeah, or lose
the fight?
And lose the fight, yeah.
So I know this sounds like a controversial take to a lot of people, but the idea that people should be able to get high and feel good, but also that can be a part of treatment, or that, in Vancouver, we kind of came up with the demand safe supply, that the thing that's really causing people trouble, the thing that caused me all kind of trouble was, one, you don't know what's in the drug supply. So in lots of places in the world right now, people are facing lethal overdoses. And in Canada, we've lost dozens, hundreds, thousands of our friends and colleagues. Perhaps in the last 5 years, 20,000 people in Canada have died, and we have a relatively small population here. British Columbia has an overdose rate that's, almost at the top of the world, an overdose fatality rate. But two, because drugs are illegal, you can go to jail, so you have to use in secret. And three, because of the illicit market, you will bankrupt yourself. You'll be broke all the time and poor. And then the four, because they're illegal, society will ostracize you and kick you out. All because you're just trying to feel all right. All because you're just trying to get a little taste of what people get at the end of every day when they go to the pub and have a beer. So we want to put this on the agenda. We want to actually talk about that again. We want to bring to the front that, it's not just about dope sickness, and it's not just about staying alive. Those things are very important. But for a lot of us, staying alive means the ability to manage all of these variables that I'm talking about. Let me just play the last clip from Raya Jean. Could you roll that, Heidi?
Suboxone person is, I guess, somebody who is capable of perfection, and because they're capable of complete abstinence, because really the drug is designed, you're not supposed to be using, you're not supposed to mess with it, right? You are supposed to remain abstinent, right? And get on with your life and go back to work and be a contributing member of the capitalist thing. And that's, I guess, how I appear to some people. But like, what if that's not right, you know? And what if I don't even believe that bullshit? Like, I don't. People get high because of a reason, whatever the reason is, right? And so you can't just take it away from them. That's not going to work. So if a drug is blocking me from getting my needs met, then that means I'm not getting my needs met. I just don't believe that you can deprive somebody of their coping mechanism, plus their family connections, plus any social connections that they have, and that they are going to get better. That's what causes most of the trouble, right? It's other people designing drugs for us, but really they're designing them for themselves and what they feel comfortable with, right? And that's never going to work. So stop trying to do that. It doesn't work, you know, like, and if you do that, then you got to be honest with people about the fact that, okay, look, this is a drug designed for people that are going to be perfectly abstinent. Are you that person? You know? But they don't say that. They don't say that. Why not? That's what they believe. They're trying to trick us or something.
So Raya, now I can tell you, kind of gave up that fight. She decided she was struggling for this pure abstinence eventually, you know, struggling to follow the rules. And she decided that she wanted to balance her life, which meant sometimes using. She wanted to reduce the harm of that. And she wanted an OAT or some kind of medication that would take care of her during the in-between times, but not fight her when she wanted to get high. So she got on methadone. And, you know, she's still adjusting over to that, but she said it was a great relief. She told me suddenly she could just get up in the morning and do the things she wanted to do, like make toast or write in her journal or do art or go to meetings or whatever. And I really felt that because I have spent a lot of my life fighting to get to this place of abstinence that I can't do. I can't get there. I'm just not like that. And that's okay. And I think we want to put that back on the agenda. You know, in too many places, this is sort of like the default setting. So today I wanted to introduce you to a panel. I'm going to take you through one at a time, but I'll tell you, we got Sione Crawford, Angela McBride, Judy Chang, and Matt Bond. And I'm going to take you to each of them, and we're going to talk about how euphoria and these insidious attempts to control euphoria have impacted people's lives. Everyone's got a little story. And so we're going to start by talking to Sione in Australia. Are you there, my friend? There he is. Sione, could you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. My name's Sione, and I'm from New Zealand, Aotearoa originally. I now live in Melbourne, Victoria, and I work at Harm Reduction Victoria, which is the drug user organisation here in Melbourne. And I've worked in this kind of drug user organising for the last sort of 15, 18 years, something like that.
Thanks. You know, when we were talking about this before, you talked about how the sort of the space of euphoria and drug use could create for you your own little sort of mental cubbyhole. Can you explain when you figured that out and what that means?
Yeah, sure. So when I lived in New Zealand, when I was a very young man, I used, over there it was morphine, and we'd bake it into, we turn it into heroin basically. Did that for a number of years, and then I ended up stopping using for a while, like people do, moved to Australia, and through a whole chain of events anyway, which mainly revolved around a relationship breaking up, I ended up deciding quite kind of logically in my mind that I wanted to start using again. And for me, at that point in time, it was really a space to kind of relax away from the world, I guess you'd say. And it was a conscious decision to have a space that was my own. So my partner did not use, the person that I was breaking up with didn't use. And it was sort of like a repudiation almost of that relationship. It was like, right, this is my thing that I've done before, that I really, that I kind of identify with really strongly. And I'm going to go away and do that for a while for myself every now and then. And it was like my little secret, but it was not a shameful secret at that point.
Tell me about the rational choice to decide there. You said this decision point where you quite consciously decided. People always think that we're these out of control zombies, that we can't manage anything, we can't change our behavior, we're not in control. But you were telling me you made a very deliberate choice there. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I mean, I did not have a habit or anything like that. And I didn't have a physical dependency. I hadn't used for quite some time, but I knew exactly how opioids made me feel. I knew exactly what they would bring to the table for me at that point in time. And it was that space that was my own. And I think it's hard unless you've used opioids in that way and sought euphoria in that way. It may be tricky to understand, but there was a part on the podcast with Ray that I listened to where she talked about vomiting into the toilet and how awful that looks from outside, but within, when you're using opioids and that happens, you're in that space and it's your own. And even that experience is actually something that fundamentally you end up choosing. And yeah.
Raya said it's like bringing up silk, and it's I know it's hard for people to imagine, but it is sort of like this great feeling of, I don't know, it feels good.
You sort of know once you stop vomiting like that that sort of honeymoon starting period of using when it's really good is kind of going away. Once that's right. When I started using again, I would vomit like that. I was like, oh, that's right. That's being really stoned. Great. And then later on down the track, when that went away, I started realizing that it was becoming more of a routine.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was a really young guy, I was in the Taco Bell in San Francisco in California. I was in the bathroom there and I fixed and I went out, I was going to get a soda or something from the Taco Bell. And, there's a kid's birthday party going on. I was like, oh, isn't this nice? And I was just feeling very, very calm. And all of a sudden I realized, oh, this is really good dope. I'm going to throw up. But there was people in the bathroom. And so I had to run outside. I was like, I can't throw up around this kid's birthday party. So I ran out the door. I ran around the window and I just... blah! It was so great. I was like, it's like I'm conducting a symphony. This is lovely. And I turn around, I realized I wasn't behind a wall. It was the window into the Taco Bell, and all the kids were in there staring at this freak outside throwing up. And but I definitely feel what you're talking about. I never thought we would talk about the euphoria of throwing up on this panel, but this is good.
No, until I heard that. When I listened to it yesterday. Yeah,
she has quite a way with words, does our Raya. Yeah.
But even that running around and vomiting in front of the kids, a lot of people would see that from the outside and it's like how awful, you sort of, this gross junkie throwing up in public in front of these lovely kids. But even that, I'm assuming that you were fixing in the toilet at Taco Bell because you had nowhere else to do it.
That's right.
And that wouldn't have happened if there had maybe been an injector room in that neighborhood or whatever, So quite often we're sort of funneled into these choices, which I guess fundamentally are choices when you think about it, but really aren't choices when you take it back a few steps.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think everybody who makes a choice in society does it the same way we do, is that you have some element which is your own agency, and then you have this big element which is the world and its constraints around you. So if you're buying a car, it's not your own choice. It's how much money do you have? It's what's available. It's every choice we make in society is a balance of the structural forces and the agency we have as people. And I think that everyone has to remember drug users are always trying to have a little bit more agency and self-determination, but we're also facing some very daunting structures. So it's a very constrained kind of choice. I totally agree with you. And when I hear you saying you're taking that choice to start using heroin again, I really understand it, right? Because it's like, given the structures, given what's around you in your life, it makes sense, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a 1, 2, 3 step that makes a lot of sense. And certainly at the time I felt like not confident in my ability to not get a habit again. I never felt confident in that way, but I did know of a few things I could do to maybe to make using a positive force, at that point in time, just things like not using 2 days in a row and keeping amounts pretty small and stuff like that.
Do you and how are things now?
So I'm on methadone, and a lot of what Ray spoke about and you talked about at the start here as well really resonate pretty strongly. I was on buprenorphine, we call it bupe in Australia, buprenorphine or Suboxone for a very short time. After that period that we were talking about, I essentially made the decision to go on a program really, within a few weeks actually of starting to use again, because I realized that I was going down a path that, and so I knew that I needed some backup, I guess. And for me, the buprenorphine was awful for all the reasons that Ray actually talked about. I felt like I was continually electrified, my nerves were jangling, and my body felt at war with itself a lot. And I realized it was because actually I ultimately wanted to keep using. So I made that another decision again to change and go on methadone. It was quite tricky to make that change simply because the service that I was at, the clinic I was at, had suggested Suboxone to me, and buprenorphine at the time. And so actually having to explain to the doctor why I wanted to change to methadone, I essentially felt like I had to lie about it. And I wasn't able to say, well, it's because I want to use sometimes and top it up. It was more, I had to come up with another reason, which, I told the truth about how it was making me feel, but I had to do a lot of convincing when actually it was probably just the thing I should have done in the first place, because actually I wanted to still have that opportunity, I guess, to have some agency. I sort of feel like methadone's a good, it's helped, it's assisted me a lot, not because it's methadone itself, but because I haven't had to spend all of my money on drugs at all times for the last 20 years. But
me
I
too.
Still wanted that time and agency to do something for myself, every now and then as well, which is using.
I mean, this is so true, is that the rules and the strictures of addiction medicine make us have to conform to those rules, and we bend ourselves into strange shapes, and we also have to tell stories to doctors. We have to choose when we use so that we can piss clean. We have to sort of explain, like you're saying, you couldn't be straight truthful with your doctor. And so it's like, this is one of the reasons why we're raising this whole topic, is because after we put that episode out that you all just heard clips from, we got a lot of letters from doctors who were really upset. Well, we've never heard this. We didn't know. And I said, well, your patients can't be honest with you. They get to be honest with us because we have no power over anybody else's life. But my methadone doctor, for example, is the most powerful person in my universe. What she decides about my script decides everything that's going to happen to me after that. So it's very difficult to be just straight and honest with a medical professional, even though that's what we want to be. I think most drug users want to find a place of honesty. We want to be having that egalitarian relationship with the person who's writing the script, but the rules sometimes forbid that.
100%. I'll never forget the look on my doctor's face when I had to do a piss test, which is really unusual for this doctor, but I wanted to get takeaways, so she asked me to do one immediately, and it came back red, it came back like, she was so shocked and surprised. She really had no concept that was something that might happen. I felt kind of guilty, because I felt like I would have been honest with you if I felt like I could be, but why I'm not.
I know there's a lot of doctors that probably are listening or might hear this, and I think it's important for them to know that it's not just us that lies to you. Everybody lies to you. Everybody lies to the doctor. I think you'll find that's true. And we even have researchers here in Vancouver who've published a little bit of paper, a little bit of study on, what happens, what the different outcomes for people, particularly drug users, particularly Indigenous drug users, are when they're truthful versus when they're slightly evasive, not as truthful to the doctors. And so when people aren't honest with you, drug users or non-drug users, I think it's because they're trying to find a modicum of safety and protection in their lives, because the things that are decided when you go see the doctor are pretty serious, Sione, thank you for sharing your story with us. Is there anything you wanted to add just before I go on to the next contestant?
No, my pleasure. Thanks for chatting. Really good to talk.
Yeah, you too. It's been great to get to meet you and chat with you a little bit through this, through putting this panel together, and I'm thankful for that.
You too, 100%. Thanks, man.
Angela, step right up. Angela from South Africa. Are you in the house?
I am in the house. Yes, I am.
All right. Good to see you. We were, I'm going to ask you about the same sort of thing, but when we were talking, back and forth on a Google document about this panel, a phrase you wrote really sticks in my head, and it's that drugs give me time to respond. Actually, could I just get you to introduce yourself? I hear I'm jumping into the substantial stuff because I'm so stoked from talking to Sione. Could you just introduce yourself a little bit for people?
Sure. I'm Angela McBride, and I am the director of the South African Network of People Who Use Drugs. And my pronouns are she and her. Yeah.
Thanks, Angela. If this was a Crackdown episode, none of you would notice this just happened. I would edit this and it would look like I'd never made a mistake. So now I'm going to go on with the actual question. And I'll just, we were going back and forth preparing for this panel in a little Google Doc, and everybody was writing a little bit about how they connect to this topic. And one of the sentences you wrote was that drugs give you time to respond. Could you explain what you were meaning there?
Yeah, so especially when it comes to like processing things. So and I think we all have, like you spoke about it earlier, like traumatic experiences and, life shit. And I found that like one of the ways that drugs have helped me is that I can put the processing on pause. I can arrange a space and a time for me that best suits me to have a proverbial emotional breakdown, but which usually leads to like an in-depth space for processing and processing the trauma and the past experiences. Because usually as well, like I say, I struggle to dedicate or to allow myself time to feel, and I don't necessarily want to, or most of the time I don't want to face in the space to do it. So, being able to use drugs to pause and to take a moment and respond to me, as well as respond to external factors and experiences, even just, smoking a J before I go into a meeting to make sure I'm not having heart palpitations or something to that extent. Yeah.
And I know we haven't got to talk very much, so I always feel a little guilty, like asking people personal questions when I don't know them too well. I guess I'm getting used to that being in the podcast. But can you remember when you first realized you were doing this? When you kind of became conscious and started to be conscious about instituting this into your life?
Yeah. So I went through quite, like when I was in my teens, I used drugs in a way that was harmful for me. Also because I didn't understand. I didn't know how to use drugs. I only had Train Spotting and Requiem for a Dream and all of these beloved, infamous movies were my points of reference. So I used drugs in a way that was hurting me, and I went through a period of abstinence, and within, that 12-step model, I found that there was a lot of perpetuation of guilt and shame. And, it's come up a few times, is that like trying to fit into a box and being told what that box is instead of like getting the space or given the space to create what works for me. So when I started working in the field of harm reduction, I started to learn how to use drugs in a less harmful way, in a way that was safe and constructive for me. And when my pops died a few years ago, it was quite a hardcore traumatic experience within itself. And I
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's all right. It took me about a year to 18 months to plan my processing. I had stimulants. I also was dishonest with my doctor to get prescription stimulants so that I could focus on work or focus on anything other than the trauma that was going on inside of me. So fast forward a few months where I could set time aside, like New Year's, and I sat and I made the space. I had my own space. I set the music. I set the environment. I was on my own, but I also made sure to let my family and friends know that I was doing this and this is how I was. So eventually it does, and I had to go through all of that, as well as the education, as well as the observation of my own behavior and my drug use, to get to the point where I'm like, okay, hey, hold on. This is helping me get to the point where I can process my shit.
I mean, this is really making me think about my own life. Last summer, we lost a really good comrade and leader here at the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, someone who'd been my friend for many, many years. And we kind of come up together. I learned a lot from this guy. Wade Crawford was his name. And, we held a memorial for him. And afterwards, we were on to planning the next memorial for somebody else. And this has just been never ending around here since 2016, but really in a way for most of my life. But there was something, it felt like something was letting go or breaking inside. And so I did use opioids right then. And I hadn't been for a while. And I'm only really now reflecting back in light of what you said. I'm realizing that I was doing the same thing. I was using it for processing. And I'm going to have to think about what you said a little bit, because I think this could be really good advice to a lot of drug users and also people who are adjacent to the community. Is you said you didn't know how to use drugs, and then you just explained to us how to use drugs right, or at least right for you. And I think in many cases, right for me. I think this is an important thing for people to know. Have you ever talked to people or written about how do you use drugs right?
I mean, in conversations, yeah, but not necessarily written down. I mean, the information is there. It's stuff that colleagues and friends have shared with me, and I also speak about it a lot. Is I have a phenomenal support structure. Even before this session, I was on the phone with my mom explaining what I was doing, and I'm I'm so nervous, and she was like, "It's cool, you've got this. You know what's going on." And having that support, having people who have the experience in using drugs safely, and that conversation, and having a platform to actually speak about it, and counter all of the in a way brainwashing and bullshit that society has told us about drugs. That's been helpful. And I do think it would be awesome to have a consolidated document or whichever, or even just a space where we can come together and share that information, and share our experience based on safe and fun drug use, rather than the automatic association of it being evil, bad, or whichever.
So do you feel nervous right now?
I feel a lot better now. I really do. After I spoke to my mom, I feel so much better.
The mum drug. That's pretty good. Did you smoke a joint before we went on the panel?
Oh yeah. I was not going to do this without that.
Fucking A. I mean, thanks for being so honest with us. I'm just keep looking in the camera, but my instinct is to pick up a pen and write down half of what you said. But because I just feel the application in my own life and in a lot of people's lives. And if we had this path that wasn't so stigmatized, that we could actually say out loud, yeah, I need to feel good sometimes. I need the euphoria. I need to use it consciously and at times make a rational choice like Sione did, or to use it to slow down things and process like you're talking about, like I did last summer. Like, I think that's a really important contribution. And I'm glad that we can start to find the spaces to say this out loud. Like, I'm glad to this conference that they gave us. And I think as the international drug user movement, we have to make these conversations louder so that they can start to compete with just this knee-jerk abstinence that we're faced with all the time, you know?
Exactly, 100%. I think it's time to change that narrative as well.
It's really liberating to say your truth, hey? Like, because like I've been so used to explaining, either just completely hiding that I was a dope fiend all my life and an opioid user, or trying to explain it in the context that the 12-step program I was in could understand, or the methadone doctor. I was so used to telling other people according to what they needed that I never even thought to myself what is true for me. And to be able to do that is kind of liberating.
Exactly. Like being able to speak your truth and say what works and what doesn't work, fitting into like a tick box or a step or whichever the case may be.
That's right. They had to put us in boxes in that 12-step. We, in fact, have to make an inventory of our own moral defects. So we had to... Pardon me?
Sorry. No, carry on. Sorry, I was just venting.
You go ahead. This is you.
Just lots of fun experiences with abstinence-based programs. Especially, my favorite is to apologize to everyone, including those who have harmed you. That doesn't work so well with like sexual assault and stuff, and to be put in that position, not even talking about like the the sexual predators within the programs, and it's yes.
That's right. There's always like this creepy dude who's a veteran who's kind of hanging out by the coffee thing, who's welcoming the new. I know what you mean. Like this is really interesting, right? Because we're told like either in 12-step or by the design of Suboxone or by the design of methadone rules or something, we're told one way to be, and that the problem is within us. Like we have a disease, we're broken. And I think that part of what we try to do on Crackdown and this panel is to turn it around and say, no, fix me, fuck you, fix the world. That's where the problem is, Thanks for talking to me. This has been super interesting. And I unfortunately, we should really have set aside a lot more time to do this because I have 3 more questions, but maybe we'll get to them after I go through everybody else. Thank you, Angela.
Awesome. Thanks.
The next contestant is Judy. Come on down.
Hi.
Hey, how are you doing, Judy?
Good.
Thanks. Now, I was the podcast host at the beginning, but now I'm a game show host, and I guess that's just my life now, I guess. Do you want to introduce yourself to us?
Sure. I'm Judy Chang. I'm the Executive Director of the International Network of People Who Use Drugs. Have been for 4 or 5 years now. And yeah, it's actually interesting because I think even in my role, I don't really get space or time to talk about my own drug use and reflect on it and, what it means to me throughout different stages of my life. So thanks. Pronoun.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I forgot that bit.
I think your role in the leadership of the international drug user movement is really important because one of the things, when we were talking in the Google Doc before this thing, one of the things I think you identified was important about using drugs and that felt good was the camaraderie that you got during that time. And really, our social movement is about comrades. It's about that camaraderie and building this community together. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. And yeah, I think just reflecting on that, also I think there's just so many reasons why we use drugs and people use drugs. And I think it's just so easy for society to pigeonhole it, right, and treat it as a deficit. It's a lot about managing or regulating emotions, getting through traumatic experiences, processing, as Angela said. But of course, as you started off the podcast, it's pleasure. And it is also about risk taking. And I think, a lot of people put in that risk framework, but also forgetting that risk taking is really, really pleasurable. And there's many different activities throughout society, which is all about, the merging of risk taking and pleasure. But sorry, back to camaraderie. I think, from the very beginning of my drug using career, I would say, 20, 25 years ago, it is about, finding a community and bonding, whether that was through rave scenes and, so-called recreational drugs, MDMA, speed, acid, to, the halcyon days when you're first discovering, heroin, and also finding a tribe of people to use with, scoring together, going on the hunt together, and also, till now, finding, the drug user activist community and being connected with that. And I think, you mentioned in your intro, it's a way to, mitigate or reduce the shame, right? Because, no matter kind of how resilient we are and have proved ourselves to be, there is that lingering self-stigma and the shame and the way, the public perceives you. But I think, really being able to find power in the drug use activist community and, being proud and seeing it as a sign of resilience and, being able to get through things that I think a lot of other people, wouldn't be able to, and still being proud about that and being open and public and, sharing your stories. I think there's real power in that.
You talked about the halcyon days of finding a community of heroin users. Can you take us there? Like, if it was a movie, what would the scene be? We were talking earlier, I think it was Angela had mentioned, that all they had was train spotting and stuff like that. So if we were to remake the movie, if we were to make the movie that we would want to make, what would the halcyon days look like?
Well, I think it's funny because I can't remember how old I was when I watched Train Spotting, but I was thinking, I actually thought, that's why it was, attractive in a way, right? And that danger. And, I think with my heroin use, I think I actually, wanted it, it was attractive to me. I don't think it was something that I was scared of. And, somehow, the idea that what you put out into the world, you kind of get. And, I was connecting with people that were using before I had started using. And, that's how I kind of got onto it. And even, of course, the first time it's kind of like smoking a cigarette, lots of vomiting, but, you kind of, there's things you get out of it and you just kind of keep on going and connecting to people, right? It's not just always, you're a victim that falls into it. It can be very intentional in a lot of ways because you are, processing a lot of things because you are getting something out of it. And I think that's what a lot of people, don't realize. As you mentioned, it's always seen as irrational. But for me, it was a very rational response to, a very rational world, whether it's trauma or just isolation, racism, there's so many structural problems and so many issues in the world and so many inequalities that, I think drug use is a very rational way of responding to that when you do, individually have a hard time in dealing with that or being exposed to all the inequalities and injustices.
Yeah, in Canada here, about a kilometer from where I'm sitting, opium was criminalized in 1908 out of white supremacy. It was a way for the Canadian government to target, this immigrant laborers primarily from Japan and China in this big wave of anti-immigrant panic and fear and racism that was mainstream politics in British Columbia and Canada back in 1908. There were just very high-powered politicians who this was their main platform. And so this was engaging with those politics and targeting people. But in Canada, we typically like to kind of be a little polite. So you don't say the out loud thing that you're actually doing. You do this little trick where you're like, oh, we're just going to use the Opium Act to go and attack people. Could you explain a little bit more about how racism and targeting drug users or the shame fits in altogether? I think this is something people don't really think about the drug war, how fundamentally, deeply racist it is, not just by accident, not just a byproduct, but at its very heart.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, it was to target like migrant Chinese communities in Canada, and it targeted smoking opium, right? It's not injecting, because that was a practice that amongst Chinese communities. And, you know, I've done a lot of reading on it as well. And, you know, opium smoking has been part of Chinese society for, you know, hundreds of years. But because it was a lot of the wealthier communities doing it, you know, it wasn't seen as a problem for so long. But, you know, I think it's also just proof that it is part of human experience, and, you know, it's always been there. But then it gets, you know, weaponized, and it's been heavily tied to racism and this fear of like people taking over your jobs and migrants and etc. It's like, okay, we have to bring people down some way who are a threat. So yeah, and hence the drug war. But yes, I think, you know, there's a lot more conversations about links between racism and the drug war, which, you know, needs to be exposed and expanded. So yeah, I think it's, you know, conversations we, you know, need to keep on the agenda as well. But yes, it's always been about, you know, othering and attacking.
Mm-hmm. We had a lot of very racist media representations that sort of fanned the flames around that time. And we were talking about train spotting a couple of times on this panel. And it's funny because that's a more modern representation. And people have kind of picked apart that film. And when I was in Glasgow in 2019, and I ended up hanging out with a group of drug users there, I was saying to myself, don't mention train spotting. Don't mention train spotting. It's such a tourist cliche thing to say. Don't say it. Don't say it. And then somebody else did. And then everybody had this big conversation about train spotting. And of course, people had personal connections to someone who was in it, or they used to live in Edinburgh or whatever like that. And by the end of it, we had a sort of whole discourse on whether it was good or bad, whether they liked the representation or not. They had decided that I was more like Spud than any other character in there, but that there was the idea of humanizing the people who use drugs and just showing that people are using it for euphoria and it's not all bad and zombies and stuff. Made it come out with a good grade in the minds of people, and these are people in Glasgow who had been using heroin for decades.
Yeah, I think it was packed with cliches, of course. Looking back, I think, yeah, maybe I was 12 when it first came out. But yeah, as you mentioned, it is humanizing and, you know, creating these beloved characters who are like using drugs and dependent on drugs. And I think, yeah, that's, you know, some of the power of it as well. But yeah, you were speaking before about halcyon days of, you know, when you're first starting heroin. And I think, I mean, another kind of cultural reference point, you know, the Lou Reed song, A Perfect Day, life kind of becomes like that, you know, and I think so growing up, you know, I had some depression and, you know, sometimes it's hard to go through daily life, but, you know, using drugs kind of helps you get through that, right? So you're not like, oh, it's such a, you know, you have a reason sometimes to get out, you know, get out of bed, get out of the house, then, you know, be able to hang out in, I don't know, the park or whatever. Like it can make some really mundane aspects to life, like much more interesting and much more
animals in the zoo.
Easier to get through.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, when I saw that film ages and ages ago, that's the part I thought they really got right. Like when they hit the Perfect Day by Lou Reed, as like, oh, someone really knows what's going on there. At least part of the time. Thanks for talking to me, Judy. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go to Matt now. Matt Bond, my friend from many time zones east. And Matt, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Sure, and it's been great listening to everybody. But my name's Matthew Bond. I'm the program coordinator with the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs. Also on the board of INHSU, and yeah, I've been using drugs for, it's been about 20-ish years now, on and off, kind of like feeling that I had to be off drugs for a lot of my life. So now I just accepted that I use drugs. I like who I am when I'm honest about myself, and that I can be honest about myself. but I still get a lot of backlash from it, from my family, from my community, from people. Just they can't accept me for being a drug user.
Let's talk about that a little bit. When we were getting ready for this panel, and Matt, you really played a big role in organizing this and bringing us all together. So I want to acknowledge that. But when we were talking about it, you brought us back to like a time in grade 7 when you found weed in a cookie jar, and it gave you some moments of euphoria, but also introduced you to sort of punishment and ostracization. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, sure. It's so funny every time like I tell my story and I mention the cookie jar, like everyone wants to know about the cookie jar. But my mom hid her weed in her cookie jar, and it was one of those like cows that kind of had the arms and screwed his head off. But she would
like did it moo when you open it? Like did it bust you and narc on you when you were
no mooing? It was just kind of like a porcelain cow, but like it was in the most obvious spot. Like, and I don't know if that was to be like conspicuous, like I wouldn't look in the cookie jar. But
what kid is not going to look in the cookie jar?
Looking back at it, it was actually my friend that found it. So maybe she did something right. So my friend, who was a more experienced user, he kind of had an older brother that was smoking weed. He was over, and we were just doing what kids do, kind of looking around, and it's kind of that experimenting phase of like, oh, what are we going to do after school today? And so he found this bag of weed, and we pencil rolled a joint, and we went on my mom's back doorstep, and she has all kinds of plants, and we smoked it. And I just remember, like, for the first time, like laughing, and like really kind of like laughing, like just that nothing, almost like when you take shrooms sometimes and you have that like geek out. But it just felt okay to be who I was, right? Like I didn't have all these little insecurities and all these little like things that always picked away at me. But of course, we end up smoking half the bag, and you get in trouble. But it's like thinking
what
back,
happened? What kind of trouble did you get in?
Oh, I got, grounded. I wasn't allowed to hang out with him, my friend. Like not allowed to watch TV or go out besides school, things like that. But thinking back at it, it's like they're grounding you for their shame or their insecurities. I'm smoking their weed, but I get in trouble, right? And it's like it never made sense to me. And nowadays I can have like a conversation with my mom about smoking weed. I can smoke weed with her, but other drugs, it's just off the table. Like she's still one that will not accept me for my fentanyl use or my benzo use. And it's hard because she's one of the only like real supports in my life, right? So it sucks. Like I hear everyone talking, having to lie to the doctor. I have to lie to her a lot of the times, and it kills me to do that, right?
I hear you. I mean, I'm kind of just in this weird place of last few years getting to know my parents a little bit, and me and my mom haven't had this kind of conversation. But I know she listens to the podcast, so it's kind of like that's a weird feeling. But I hear you, and I guess a lot of this panel has been about how important it is to have the right space to say our truth. For people's views to not be so hardcore that it shuts us up from saying what we need to do. Do you think your mom's view would be different if it was prescription fentanyl, like if she knew it wasn't as imminent a threat of overdose?
100%. Like methadone's fine. Anything like I'm prescribed methadone, benzodiazepine, so Valium, Vyvanse, so more or less an opioid, a stimulant, and a benzodiazepine, and all that's fine. But when I start using illegal substances, she shuts me out. She won't talk to me. She kicks me out. She won't be around me. but it's also, I think a lot of it is because I have to hide it too, right? Like if I could just say, hey, look, I'm going to get high right now and you're not going to find me high. Like, that's a lot of the times it's like she finds me using because I can't just, say, hey, I'm going to use right now while she's allowed to go, turn the music up and get drunk and smoke weed, which is great. But, we don't have that luxury with illegal drugs, right? We have
Do
to.
you live in the same house as her?
On and off, I have, but I'm not right now because of my drug use. And,
Right.
I wish I could because I'm just not that stable to really have my own place right now, I don't think. And I think having that relationship with her is something that I desperately kind of need. And we still do have it, but it sucks.